Emma Dawson's entire life changed the moment a golden retriever slammed into her knees at full speed, sending her sprawling across the damp grass of Riverside Park, with her sketchbook flying through the air like a confused bird. She landed hard on her back, the wind knocked out of her lungs, staring up at the gray October sky while a very enthusiastic dog licked her face with the kind of devotion usually reserved for long-lost family members. Emma sputtered, trying to push the massive animal away, but he was determined to show his affection through aggressive tongue-based communication. "Zeus, get off her right now." A deep voice cut through the morning air, panicked and urgent. The dog reluctantly backed away, tail wagging so hard his entire rear end moved with it, and Emma finally got a clear view of the man sprinting toward her. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it one too many times that morning. He wore expensive-looking running clothes that somehow made him look both casual and put together, and his face carried the kind of genuine horror that told Emma he wasn't some careless dog owner who let this happen regularly. "I am so sorry," he said, reaching down to help her up. His hand was warm and firm as she took it, and he pulled her to her feet with ease. "Are you hurt? Did he scratch you? I swear he's never done anything like this before." "Well, he has, but not in months, and I thought we were past this phase, but apparently I'm fine," Emma interrupted, brushing grass off her jeans. Her heart was still racing from the collision, but nothing felt broken or even particularly bruised. Just surprised. The golden retriever sat between them now, looking up at Emma with big brown eyes that seemed to ask why she'd stopped petting him. His tail continued its metronome swing across the grass. "Your drawings," the man said suddenly, noticing the scattered pages from her sketchbook. He immediately dropped to his knees and started gathering them carefully, treating each page like it might be made of glass. Emma joined him, reaching for the nearest sheet, but he was faster, collecting them with surprising gentleness for someone with such large hands. When he handed them back to her, their fingers brushed, and Emma noticed he'd taken the time to make sure they were in order. He must have checked the page numbers in the corners. "These are incredible," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Are you an artist?" "Freelance illustrator," Emma replied, clutching the sketchbook to her chest. She'd been coming to this park for 3 months now, ever since she'd moved to the city, and this was the most interesting thing that had happened to her. "I was working on a children's book commission." "Was?" His eyebrows drew together with concern. The grass stains might be a problem. She showed him one page where a smudge of green now decorated the corner of a carefully drawn rabbit. The man's face fell in a way that was almost comical. He looked at his dog, who remained blissfully unaware of the chaos he'd caused, then back to Emma. "Let me make this right, please. Can I buy you coffee? There's a place just outside the park that's supposed to be good." Emma hesitated. She'd moved to New York from a small town in Connecticut specifically to avoid complications. Her plan was simple: build her illustration career, keep her head down, and prove to her parents that she could make it as an artist without their disapproval hanging over her like a storm cloud. Random encounters with handsome strangers and their overly friendly dogs were not part of the plan. But Zeus chose that moment to rest his head on her foot, looking up at her with such pure adoration that her resolve crumbled. "One coffee," she said. The man's face broke into a relieved smile that transformed his entire appearance. "I'm Grant, by the way. Grant Oakes. Emma Dawson." They shook hands formally, which felt absurd after Zeus had already introduced himself via tackle and face licking, but Emma appreciated the gesture. Grant had a good handshake, firm without being aggressive, the kind her father always said you could trust. The coffee shop Grant led her to was one of those places that looked unassuming from the outside, but turned out to have 15 different milk options and pastries that probably cost more than Emma's weekly grocery budget. She ordered a simple latte, not wanting to seem high maintenance, but Grant insisted she try the almond croissant, and she found herself agreeing. They sat at a small table by the window, Zeus lying at Grant's feet with the patience of a dog who knew he was in trouble. The morning light caught the angles of Grant's face, and Emma found herself wanting to sketch him, which was unusual. She typically drew animals and children for her work, not grown men who looked like they'd stepped out of a cologne advertisement. "So," Grant said, wrapping his hands around a black coffee that he hadn't added anything to, "tell me about this children's book." Emma broke off a piece of her croissant, which was indeed worth whatever astronomical price it probably cost. "It's about a mouse who wants to be a chef but keeps burning everything she cooks. The author's message is about persistence and finding your own path." "That sounds perfect for kids." Grant leaned forward slightly, genuinely interested. "How did you get into illustration?" "I've always drawn," Emma said, the standard answer she gave everyone. The real answer was longer and involved her parents' insistence that art wasn't a real career, her older sister's perfect life as a lawyer, and Emma's stubborn refusal to follow anyone's path but her own. "What about you? What do you do when you're not letting your dog assault innocent women in parks?" Grant laughed, and it was a good sound, warm and unguarded. "I work in hospitality. Hotels, mostly." He said it casually, like it was no big deal, and Emma filed that information away without much thought. Lots of people worked in hotels in New York. They talked for over an hour. Emma learned that Grant had adopted Zeus from a shelter 2 years ago, that he ran every morning before work, and that he'd moved to New York from Chicago 5 years earlier. Grant learned that Emma had been in the city for 3 months, that she missed her hometown's quiet sometimes but loved the energy here, and that she took her coffee with 1 sugar and cream. When Emma finally checked her phone and realized how much time had passed, she started to gather her things. "I should go, I have a deadline tomorrow." "The grass stains," Grant said, guilt flooding his expression again. "Did I ruin your work?" "Nothing I can't fix." Emma stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Thank you for the coffee and croissant, that was really nice of you." "It was the least I could do." Grant stood too, and Zeus immediately perked up, ready for whatever came next. "Can I get your number, in case there's any damage I should pay for, or if the grass stains are worse than you thought, or, Emma found herself smiling. "Or if I want to apologize again," Grant finished, his own smile turning a bit sheepish. "I feel like 1 coffee isn't enough after Zeus practically tackled you." Emma should have said no. She had work to focus on, a career to build, and no time for distractions. But Grant was looking at her with an expression that was part hopeful and part nervous, and Zeus had started wagging his tail again, and the croissant had been really good. She rattled off her number, and Grant entered it into his phone immediately, then called her so she'd have his. "I'll text you," he promised. Emma expected him to text the next day, or maybe in a few days. What she didn't expect was to hear from him 3 hours later, just as she was finishing the touch-ups on her grass-stained illustrations. The message read, "Zeus wants to formally apologize. Would dinner work better than coffee? Tomorrow night." Emma stared at her phone, her sensible side warring with the part of her that had actually enjoyed this morning's unexpected encounter. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, "What does Zeus have in mind?" Grant's reply came quickly. "He suggests Italian food. He's very sophisticated for a dog who eats his own foot fur." Emma laughed out loud in her tiny apartment, startling herself with the sound. When was the last time she'd laughed like that? She couldn't remember. She texted back, "Italian works. But only if you promise Zeus won't trip the waiters." They made plans for 7 the next evening, and Emma spent the next 30 hours alternating between excitement and telling herself this wasn't a big deal. It was just dinner, an apology dinner, nothing more. Except when Grant picked her up outside her apartment building in Brooklyn, wearing dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look impossibly blue. Emma realized it was definitely more than nothing. "You look beautiful," he said, and the way he said it made Emma believe he wasn't just being polite. She'd chosen a simple green dress and her favorite leather jacket with ankle boots that gave her a few extra inches of height. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The restaurant Grant had chosen was in the West Village, a cozy place with dim lighting and the kind of atmosphere that whispered romance. Emma felt her pulse quicken as the host led them to a corner table. This was definitely a date, a real date. She hadn't been on one of those in over a year, not since she'd caught her ex-boyfriend kissing someone else at a party and decided men were more trouble than they were worth. But Grant held her chair for her, and when he sat down across from her, his foot accidentally bumped hers under the table, and he apologized with such earnest concern that Emma felt her defensive walls starting to crack. "So," she said, opening her menu, "tell me more about the hotel business." Something flickered across Grant's face, so quick she almost missed it. "What do you want to know? How did you get into it?" Grant took a sip of the water their server had poured. "My father started a small hotel when I was a kid. I grew up around it, learned the business from the ground up. Started in housekeeping, actually." "Really?" Emma couldn't picture the polished man across from her cleaning hotel rooms. "My father believed in understanding every aspect of the business. So I did housekeeping, then front desk, then management. By the time I was 25, I was running the hotel." "That's impressive," Emma said, and she meant it. "It's family business," Grant replied with a shrug. "What about your family? Are they artistic too?" Emma's smile tightened slightly. "Not exactly. My parents are both accountants. My sister's a lawyer. They think art is a nice hobby, not a real career." "But you're making it work," Grant pointed out. "I'm trying to." Emma appreciated that he said it like it was a fact, not a question. "The children's book I'm working on is my 3rd commission this year. If I can land a few more, I'll actually be able to afford a bigger apartment." They ordered their food, and the conversation flowed easily between them. Grant told her about Zeus's habit of stealing socks and hiding them under the couch. Emma told him about the time she'd accidentally spilled ink all over a nearly finished illustration and had to start completely over. They talked about movies and music and the weirdest things they'd seen on the subway. Emma kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Grant to reveal some fatal flaw or red flag, but it never came. He was attentive without being overbearing, funny without trying too hard, and he asked questions like he genuinely wanted to know her answers. When the check came, Grant grabbed it before Emma could even reach for her purse. "This is way more than making up for grass stains," she protested. "Then consider it me wanting to spend time with you," Grant said simply. "Not everything has to be about Zeus's poor manners." He walked her back to her apartment, and they took the long way, wandering through streets lit by shop windows and streetlights. Emma told him about her favorite illustration, a series she'd done about a traveling cat. Grant told her about the time Zeus had gotten loose in his office building and caused chaos on 3 floors before being captured in the executive kitchen eating someone's lunch. When they reached her building, Emma found herself not wanting the night to end. "Thank you for dinner. I had a really good time." "Good enough for a 3rd date?" Grant asked. "We've only had 2. Coffee was the first date. Dinner was the second, so the third one should probably be something even better. Grant's expression was hopeful but not presumptuous, giving her room to say no if she wanted to. Emma didn't want to say no. "What did you have in mind?" "Let me surprise you," Grant said. "Are you free this Saturday?" She mentally ran through her schedule. The book commission would be done by then, and she had nothing else pressing until the following week. Saturday works. Perfect. Grant smiled, and Emma noticed he had a small dimple in his left cheek that only appeared when his smile was genuine. "I'll text you the details." They stood there for a moment, the awkward end of date tension building between them. Emma wondered if he was going to kiss her, wondered if she wanted him to, decided that she definitely did, and then Grant leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her cheek instead. "Good night, Emma," he said, his voice low. "Good night," she managed, her skin still tingling where his lips had touched. She watched him walk away, hands in his pockets, and didn't go inside until he'd turned the corner and disappeared from sight. The rest of the week passed in a blur of work and text messages. Grant texted her good morning every day, usually with a photo of Zeus doing something ridiculous. Emma sent him progress updates on her illustrations, and he responded with genuine enthusiasm and thoughtful questions. They talked about everything and nothing, building something between them with each message, each shared laugh, each moment of connection. Saturday arrived with perfect fall weather, cool and crisp with a bright blue sky. Grant had told her to dress casually and be ready by 10 in the morning, which seemed early for a date, but Emma trusted him. He picked her up in a black Range Rover that looked far too expensive for someone who just worked in a hotel, but Emma pushed that thought aside. Maybe he'd saved up for it, or maybe the hotel business paid better than she thought. "Where are we going?" she asked as she buckled her seatbelt. "You'll see," Grant said, that dimple making an appearance. "Trust me," Emma surprised herself by answering honestly. "I think I do." They drove north out of the city, and Emma watched the buildings gradually give way to trees. Grant had made a playlist for the drive, a mix of indie folk and classic rock that somehow perfectly matched both their tastes. They sang along badly to the songs they knew and made fun of each other's off-key moments. After about an hour, Grant pulled off the highway and drove down a winding road that led to an apple orchard. A hand-painted sign announced that it was opening weekend for apple picking season. Emma turned to stare at him. "How did you know?" "Know what?" "That I've always wanted to go apple picking but never have." She'd mentioned it once in passing during dinner, a throwaway comment about fall traditions she'd never gotten around to experiencing. Grant's smile widened. "I pay attention." The orchard was beautiful, with rows of trees heavy with red and golden apples stretching across rolling hills. They got bags from the entrance and headed into the orchard, and Emma felt something loosen in her chest. When was the last time she'd done something just for fun, not tied to work or obligations? Grant proved to be terrible at apple picking. He kept choosing ones that were too high, requiring him to stretch up on his toes, and half the time he'd pull down 3 apples instead of 1. Emma laughed so hard she had to sit down on the grass at one point, watching him wrestle with a particularly stubborn branch. "I'm providing entertainment value," he said defensively, but he was laughing too. They filled 2 bags with apples, probably more than either of them could reasonably eat, and then lay down in the grass between the trees, looking up through the leaves at the sky. "This is perfect," Emma said softly. "Thank you for this." Grant turned his head to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You're welcome." They stayed like that for a long moment, just looking at each other, and Emma felt the world narrow down to just the two of them, the sound of other visitors fading into background noise. "I should tell you something," Grant said, his voice suddenly serious. Emma's stomach tightened. Here it was, the red flag she'd been waiting for. "Okay, I really like you," Grant continued. Really like you. And I know we've only known each other for a week, which is crazy, but I can't remember the last time I connected with someone like this." Relief flooded through Emma, followed immediately by a rush of warmth. "I really like you too," she admitted. "It is crazy, but good crazy." Grant reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and Emma felt that touch all the way through her body. They lay there holding hands in an apple orchard like teenagers, and Emma couldn't remember ever feeling this happy. On the drive back, they stopped at a farm stand and bought apple cider donuts and fresh cider. Grant got powdered sugar all over his face, and Emma took a picture of him that she immediately made her phone background. He retaliated by tickling her until she begged for mercy, and the woman running the farm stand smiled at them like they were the cutest things she'd seen all day. When Grant dropped her off that evening, Emma invited him up to her apartment for the first time. It was tiny, barely bigger than a hotel room, with her art supplies taking up most of the available space. But Grant looked around with genuine interest, studying the illustrations she had pinned to the walls and the half-finished sketches on her desk. "Your work is really incredible," he said, stopping in front of her favorite piece, a watercolor of a fox in a library. "You have so much talent." "Thank you," Emma said, meaning it. Compliments about her art always felt more significant than compliments about anything else. Grant turned to face her, and suddenly the tiny apartment felt even smaller with both of them in it. He stepped closer, giving her time to move away if she wanted to, but Emma stayed exactly where she was. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low. "For real this time?" "Yes," Emma breathed, and then his lips were on hers. It was a perfect first kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. Grant's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin gently, and Emma's hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heart racing under her palms. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Wow," Emma said. "Yeah," Grant agreed. "Wow." He kissed her again, and by the time he finally left an hour later, Emma's lips felt swollen and her heart felt full. She touched her fingers to her mouth after she closed the door, smiling like an idiot at nothing and everything. The next few weeks passed in a haze of happiness. Grant and Emma saw each other as often as their schedules allowed, which turned out to be most days. They fell into an easy rhythm, meeting for coffee in the mornings before Emma started work, and Grant headed to his hotel. They had dinner together most evenings, either at restaurants or at Emma's apartment, where Grant proved to be a surprisingly good cook. Emma met Zeus officially, spending an afternoon at Grant's apartment, which turned out to be a spacious loft in Tribeca with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that probably cost more than Emma's car. She tried not to think too hard about what kind of hotel job paid well enough for a place like this. Zeus remembered her, greeting her with enthusiasm, but thankfully no tackling this time. He brought her every toy he owned, one by one, presenting them like gifts. Emma fell in love with the ridiculous dog almost as fast as she was falling for his owner. They went to museums and movies and spent a whole Saturday afternoon just walking around the city, talking about everything and nothing. Grant told her about growing up in Chicago, about his mother who had passed away when he was 15, about the pressure of living up to his father's expectations. Emma told him about feeling like the black sheep of her family, about her fear that she'd never be successful enough to prove her parents wrong, about the loneliness she'd felt before moving to New York. The more time they spent together, the more Emma realized how much she'd been missing this kind of connection. Grant got her in a way no one else ever had. He understood her drive to succeed on her own terms, the way she threw herself into her work, the fears that kept her up at night. And Emma understood his dedication to his career, the weight of family legacy, the desire to build something meaningful. It wasn't until their 1-month anniversary, which Grant insisted on celebrating despite Emma's protests, that 1 month was hardly worth marking, that Emma's carefully constructed bubble started to show cracks. Grant had made reservations at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan, the kind of place Emma had only read about in magazines. She'd splurged on a new dress for the occasion, a deep blue number that made her feel elegant and sophisticated, and Grant's face when he picked her up told her it had been worth every penny. Dinner was incredible, course after course of beautifully presented food that tasted even better than it looked. They shared bites from each other's plates and argued playfully over whether the chocolate dessert or the lemon tart was better. Emma felt like she was living in a fairy tale, and she kept waiting to wake up. They were finishing their coffee when a man approached their table, mid-50s and wearing a suit that screamed money. "Grant Oakes," he said, his voice booming with joviality. "I thought that was you. How's everything at Oakes International?" Emma saw Grant tense, saw something like resignation flash across his face before he schooled his expression into a polite smile. "Everything's good, Richard. Thanks for asking." "Your father must be thrilled about the Singapore expansion," Richard continued, oblivious to Grant's discomfort. "Though I suppose you're too busy running the whole operation to get involved with individual properties anymore." "Something like that," Grant said shortly. "Richard, this is Emma." Emma, Richard Hartley. He owned several hotel chains on the West Coast. Richard shook Emma's hand, then launched into a story about some hotel conference he and Grant had both attended. Emma smiled and nodded, but her mind was spinning. Oakes International, running the whole operation. Individual properties. After Richard finally left, Emma set down her coffee cup carefully. "Grant, what exactly do you do at Oakes International?" Grant's jaw tightened. "Emma, are you just a manager?" She was starting to piece it together now. The expensive apartment, the Range Rover. The way he never seemed worried about money. Or is it something more than that? Grant reached across the table for her hand, but Emma pulled back. "I'm the CEO," he said quietly. "Oakes International is my family's company. We own 47 hotels across 12 countries." Emma felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "You're a billionaire." "Technically, yes, but... Emma heard her voice rising and forced it back down. They were in a public restaurant and she wasn't going to make a scene. "But what?" "You just forgot to mention that tiny detail for the past month." "I was going to tell you," Grant said. "I just wanted you to get to know me first. Not my net worth, not my company, just me." Emma stood up, grabbing her purse. "That's not fair. You don't get to decide what information I need to make my own choices." "Emma, please." Grant stood too, desperation clear in his voice. "Can we talk about this? Really talk, not here." She wanted to say no. She wanted to walk out and never look back, to protect herself from the inevitable hurt that came from caring about someone who had lied to her, even if it was by omission. But despite her anger, despite the betrayal she felt, she still cared about him. "Fine," she said. "Your place. Now." The car ride to Grant's apartment was silent and tense. Emma stared out the window, her mind racing. A billionaire. Grant was a billionaire. The sweet, funny man who had knocked her over in the park with his dog was actually one of the wealthiest people in the country, and he hadn't thought to mention it. Inside his apartment, Emma paced while Grant stood by the windows, hands in his pockets, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "Talk," she said. Grant took a deep breath. "My full name is Grant Oakes. My father, Gregory Oakes, started Oakes International 35 years ago with a single hotel in Chicago. He built it into what it is today. When he retired 2 years ago, I took over as CEO. Why didn't you tell me? Emma's voice cracked despite her best efforts. Did you think I was going to try to take your money? Did you think I wouldn't date you if I knew? No, Grant said firmly. I thought you would only see the money, the company, the reputation. Everyone does. So you lied. I never lied, Grant protested. I told you I worked in hospitality. I told you about my father's hotel. Everything I said was true. I just didn't give you the full scope. Emma stopped pacing and looked at him. Do you know how this looks from my perspective? I thought we were equals. I thought we were two normal people who met in a park and liked each other. But the whole time, there was this massive imbalance I didn't even know about. We are equals, Grant said, taking a step toward her. Your career, your art, that's just as important as anything I do. More important, actually, because you're creating something beautiful and meaningful. Don't patronize me, Emma snapped. You have 47 hotels. I can barely afford my studio apartment. I don't care about that, Grant said, his voice rising now too. I don't care that you're not wealthy. I care that you make me laugh. I care that you're passionate about your work. I care that you're kind to my dog, and that you sing off-key in the car, and that you've never once treated me like I'm anything other than just a guy you like spending time with. Emma felt tears burning in her eyes. I don't know if I can do this. Dating someone like you, it changes everything. It doesn't have to, Grant said desperately. We can still be exactly what we've been for the past month. Nothing has to change. Everything has already changed, Emma said softly. You should have told me, Grant. You should have trusted me enough to tell me from the beginning. You're right, Grant said. I should have. I was wrong to keep it from you, and I'm sorry. But Emma, please don't let this ruin what we have, what we're building together. Emma wiped at her eyes angrily. I need time. I need to think about this without you standing there looking at me like that. Grant's face fell. How long? I don't know, Emma said honestly. A few days, a week. I just need space to process this. Okay, Grant said, even though everything about his posture screamed that it wasn't okay. Take whatever time you need, just promise me you'll actually think about it. About us. Don't just write me off because I have money. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She called a car service, refusing Grant's offer to drive her home, and left his apartment feeling like her heart was breaking. The next few days were miserable. Emma threw herself into work, accepting every commission and project she could find. She ignored Grant's texts at first, then finally sent him a brief message asking him to give her space. To his credit, he backed off, though she could feel his absence like a physical ache. Her best friend Rachel came over with wine and ice cream when Emma finally broke down and explained what had happened. So let me get this straight, Rachel said, sprawled across Emma's tiny couch. The hot guy with the adorable dog who treats you like you hung the moon turns out to be crazy rich, and you're upset about this. He lied to me, Emma said, attacking her ice cream with more force than necessary. Did he, though? Rachel tilted her head thoughtfully. Or did he just not volunteer information about his bank account? Because honestly, Emma, would you have given him your number that first day if you'd known he was a billionaire? Emma opened her mouth to say yes, then closed it. She wouldn't have. She would have assumed he was just another rich guy looking for a distraction, someone who would never understand her world or her struggles. That's different, she said weakly. Is it? Rachel pressed. Look, I get that you're scared. This is big and overwhelming and way outside your comfort zone. But from everything you've told me, Grant sounds like a genuinely good guy who happens to have a lot of money. That's not actually a crime. I'm not saying it is, Emma protested. Then what are you saying? Rachel asked gently. Because it sounds to me like you're looking for a reason to run before this gets too serious and you get hurt. Emma set down her ice cream, her appetite suddenly gone. Maybe I am. Is that so wrong? It's not wrong, Rachel said. It's just sad. Because you clearly love this guy, and he clearly loves you, and you're both miserable right now for no good reason. Emma hadn't said she loved Grant. She hadn't even let herself think it. But hearing Rachel say it out loud made her realize it was true. Somewhere over the past month, between apple picking and museum visits and lazy Sunday mornings with Zeus, she'd fallen completely in love with Grant Oakes. What if it doesn't work out? Emma whispered. What if his world is too different from mine? What if I'm not enough? What if you are? Rachel countered. What if you stop being so scared and just let yourself be happy? That night, Emma lay in bed staring at her ceiling and thinking about everything Rachel had said. She thought about the way Grant looked at her, like she was the most important person in the world. She thought about how he'd remembered her throwaway comment about apple picking and turned it into the perfect date. She thought about how safe she felt in his arms, how right it felt when he kissed her. She thought about the fact that he'd apologized, that he'd admitted he was wrong to keep his wealth from her, that he'd given her space when she asked for it even though it clearly killed him to do so. By morning, Emma knew what she had to do. She texted Grant. Can we talk? Your place this afternoon. His response came 30 seconds later. Yes, thank you. What time? Emma smiled despite her nerves. Even in text messages, Grant was respectful and eager and completely endearing. She showed up at his apartment at 2, wearing jeans and a sweater because she didn't want this to be formal. This needed to be real and honest and just them. Grant opened the door before she could even knock, like he'd been waiting by it. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping about as well as she had. Hi, he said. Hi, Emma replied. Zeus pushed past Grant to greet Emma, tail wagging frantically, and Emma knelt down to hug the dog. When she looked up, Grant was watching her with such open longing that she felt her resolve solidify. I've been thinking, she said, standing up, about what you said about not wanting me to only see the money. Emma, let me finish, she interrupted gently. You were right that I probably would have treated you differently if I'd known from the beginning. I would have assumed things about you that weren't true. I would have put up walls to protect myself, and I would have missed out on the best relationship I've ever had. Hope flickered across Grant's face. Really, Emma confirmed. But Grant, you have to promise me something. No more secrets. No more holding back information because you think you're protecting me or yourself. If this is going to work, we have to be completely honest with each other. I promise, Grant said immediately. Complete honesty from now on. Starting with this, I'm completely in love with you, Emma. I know it's fast and probably crazy, but it's true. I love the way you scrunch up your nose when you're concentrating on your drawings. I love how you always order the same coffee, but pretend like you're considering other options. I love that you care so deeply about your work, and that you're not afraid to chase your dreams. I love everything about you, and I don't care if we've only known each other for a month. Sometimes you just know. Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears this time. I love you too, she said. Even though you're a billionaire and you have a ridiculous apartment and your dog has better manners than most people I know, I love you. Grant crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her like he'd been starving for it, and Emma kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. So we're doing this? Grant asked, still holding her close. For real, Emma confirmed, but I have some conditions. Anything. I pay for my own things, Emma said firmly. I'm not going to let you support me financially. I need to make my own way. Okay, Grant agreed. Though I reserve the right to occasionally buy you coffee and croissants. Occasionally is fine, Emma said. Also, I don't want to be in the tabloids or gossip columns or whatever rich people end up in. My life, my work, that stays private. I can arrange that, Grant said. My PR team is very good at keeping my personal life out of the media. And one more thing, Emma added. You have to let me meet your father. If he's important to you, I want to know him. Grant's expression turned nervous. My father can be intense. He has very strong opinions about who I should be dating. And who should you be dating, according to him? Emma asked. Someone from our social circle, someone who understands business, someone who can help expand the company's network. Grant pulled her closer. Not a brilliant illustrator from Connecticut who knocked into my life because my dog has no self-control. Zeus knocked into me, technically, Emma corrected. And if your father has a problem with me, we'll deal with it. Together. Together, Grant repeated, like he was testing out the word. I like the sound of that. They spent the rest of the afternoon on Grant's couch, talking about everything they needed to establish boundaries and expectations for their relationship. Emma appreciated that Grant took her concerns seriously, that he didn't try to dismiss her worries about their different financial situations or social circles. Over the next few months, Emma and Grant navigated the complexities of their relationship with surprising success. Grant kept his promise about honesty, telling Emma about his business dealings and the pressure he felt to maintain his father's legacy. Emma opened up about her own insecurities, her fear that she'd never be successful enough, her complicated relationship with her family. Emma finally met Grant's father at a dinner party Gregory Oakes hosted at his Connecticut estate. The older man was intimidating, tall and stern with sharp eyes that seemed to measure Emma's worth in seconds. But Emma refused to be cowed. When Gregory asked what she did, she talked about her illustration work with pride, not apologizing for her career or making herself smaller to fit his expectations. By the end of the evening, Gregory had thawed considerably, especially after Emma showed him the children's book she'd recently finished. You have talent, he'd said grudgingly, and backbone. Grant chose well. Emma also introduced Grant to her parents, which went about as well as she expected. Her mother spent the entire dinner asking Grant about his hotel work, without understanding the scope of what he did. Her father interrogated Grant about his intentions like Emma was still a teenager. But Grant handled it with grace and humor, winning over even Emma's skeptical sister by the end of the night. He's good for you, her sister Sarah admitted as they did dishes after dinner. I haven't seen you this happy in years. Emma had to agree. Despite the challenges, despite the learning curve of dating someone whose life was so different from hers, she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she hadn't known was possible. Work was going well too. Emma landed a contract with a major publishing house for a series of children's books, which meant financial stability for the first time in her career. She was proud that she'd achieved it on her own merit, without any help from Grant's connections or money. Grant insisted on celebrating with champagne and dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their 1-month anniversary, the place where Emma had learned the truth about his wealth. It felt fitting to come back here, to see how far they'd come since that difficult night. I'm so proud of you, Grant said, raising his glass. You worked incredibly hard for this and you deserve every bit of success. Thank you for believing in me, Emma said, even when I didn't believe in myself. Always, Grant promised. As the seasons changed and winter gave way to spring, Emma and Grant's relationship deepened. They spent weekends at Grant's family cabin in the Catskills, where Emma would sketch the landscape and Grant would chop wood for the fireplace like he was auditioning for a rugged outdoorsman magazine. They took Zeus to the dog park every Sunday morning, then grabbed bagels and read the newspaper together. They hosted dinner parties at Grant's apartment, mixing Emma's artist friends with Grant's business associates in a way that somehow worked perfectly. Emma moved into a bigger apartment in Brooklyn, and while Grant offered to help with the rent, she refused. But he did show up on moving day with Zeus and a dozen friends from his office, turning what would have been an exhausting solo endeavor into a party complete with pizza and beer. By the time their one-year anniversary approached, Emma felt like she'd known Grant her entire life. He was her best friend, her partner, her home. She couldn't imagine her life without him in it. Grant had been acting strange for the past few weeks, distracted and secretive in a way that was entirely unlike him. Emma wondered if something was wrong at work, but whenever she asked, he assured her everything was fine. On the morning of their anniversary, Grant suggested they go back to Riverside Park, back to the spot where Zeus had crashed into Emma's life and changed everything. "Nostalgia trip?" Emma asked, amused. "Something like that," Grant said mysteriously. It was a perfect October morning, almost exactly like the day they'd met. The leaves were changing colors, and there was a crispness in the air that promised winter was coming. Zeus trotted ahead of them on his leash, older and calmer than he'd been a year ago, but still enthusiastic about park adventures. They reached the spot where Zeus had knocked Emma down, and Emma laughed. "I can't believe it's been a year." "Best accident of my life," Grant said. Emma turned to respond and found Grant down on one knee, holding a small velvet box. Her heart stopped. "Emma Dawson," Grant said, his voice steady despite the nerves Emma could see in his eyes. "You crashed into my life a year ago, literally, and nothing has been the same since. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible. You've challenged me to be better, to be more honest, to be more present. You've loved me not because of what I have, but because of who I am. And I want to spend the rest of my life loving you the same way." He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the morning light. "Will you marry me?" Emma realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face as she nodded frantically. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, absolutely yes." Grant stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss while Zeus barked excitedly around their feet. Other park visitors started clapping, and Emma laughed through her tears, unable to believe this was her life. "I love you so much," she said against Grant's lips. "I love you too," Grant replied. "Forever." The wedding was 6 months later, in late spring, when everything was blooming and beautiful. They got married at a small estate in the Hudson Valley, intimate and elegant, with only their closest family and friends in attendance. Emma's parents cried through the entire ceremony. Gregory Oakes gave a toast about how Emma had brought joy and lightness to his son's life. Zeus served as the ring bearer and only tried to eat the flowers once. Emma wore a simple ivory dress that made her feel like a princess, and Grant couldn't stop staring at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. When they exchanged vows, Emma promised to always be honest, to support Grant's dreams while chasing her own, and to love him through whatever life threw at them. Grant promised to always respect Emma's independence, to never let his wealth come between them, and to spend every day proving he was worthy of her love. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Emma thought about that morning in the park, about Zeus crashing into her and changing the entire trajectory of her life. She'd been so focused on her career, on proving herself, on staying safe and avoiding complications. But letting Grant in, opening herself up to love despite the risks and challenges, had been the best decision she'd ever made. "What are you thinking about?" Grant asked, pulling her closer. "About how lucky we are," Emma said. about how a random encounter with an overly enthusiastic dog led to all this. Grant smiled, that dimple appearing in his cheek. Zeus is taking credit for the entire relationship, you know. I heard him telling the other dogs at the park that he's basically a matchmaker. Emma laughed. He's not wrong. They bought a brownstone in Brooklyn 6 months after the wedding, a beautiful old building with enough space for Emma's art studio and a yard for Zeus. Emma continued her illustration work, building a successful career that was entirely her own. She published multiple children's book series and even started teaching art classes on the weekends. Grant stepped back from some of his day-to-day responsibilities at Oaks International, promoting talented executives and trusting them to run things while he focused more on strategy and expansion. He made it home for dinner most nights, and he and Emma established a rule that work stayed at work. Their evenings were for each other. They traveled together, visiting Oaks hotels around the world but always taking time to explore the local culture and find hidden gems off the tourist path. In Paris, Emma sketched Notre Dame while Grant practiced his terrible French. In Tokyo, they got lost in the city and stumbled upon the best ramen restaurant Emma had ever visited. In Barcelona, they danced until dawn at a local club and laughed about being too old for this the entire next day. 2 years after their wedding, Emma found out she was pregnant. She told Grant by sketching a series of illustrations that told the story of their family expanding, ending with a drawing of the 3 of them plus a baby. Grant cried when he realized what she was telling him, then immediately picked her up and spun her around until she laughingly reminded him that she was pregnant and dizzy. Their daughter, Charlotte, was born on a snowy January morning. She had Grant's dark hair and Emma's eyes, and both of them fell completely in love the moment they saw her. Grant was a natural father, patient and gentle and completely devoted. Emma watched him rock Charlotte to sleep at 2 in the morning, singing off-key lullabies, and fell in love with him all over again. Zeus appointed himself Charlotte's personal guardian, sleeping by her crib and alerting Emma and Grant to every tiny sound. Emma captured it all in her illustrations, creating a series about a little girl and her faithful dog that became her most popular work yet. 2 years later, their son James was born, completing their family. The brownstone filled with noise and laughter and chaos, and Emma couldn't imagine wanting anything else. She and Grant figured out how to balance work and parenting, taking turns and supporting each other through the sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. Gregory Oaks became a doting grandfather, surprisingly gentle with his grandchildren in a way Emma had never expected from the stern businessman. Her parents visited frequently, and her mother finally stopped suggesting Emma get a real job now that she saw how successful and happy her daughter was. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Emma and Grant went back to Riverside Park with Zeus, Charlotte, and James. They found the same spot where everything had started, and Emma watched as their children played in the grass while Zeus supervised with patient dignity. "Do you remember what you said when I first asked for your number?" Grant asked, his arm around Emma's waist. "That I'd think about it," Emma guessed. "You said you had work to do," Grant corrected. "You were so focused on your career on not getting distracted." "And I was terrified you were going to say no." Emma leaned into him. "Best yes I ever gave. Best coffee I ever bought," Grant agreed. "Look at what it led to." They watched their children, their family, everything they'd built together from that chance encounter 5 years ago. Zeus barked at a squirrel and Charlotte squealed with delight, and James clapped his chubby hands together, and Emma felt her heart so full she thought it might burst. She thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, sitting in this park with her sketchbook, focused and determined and utterly alone. She'd been so sure that success meant doing everything by herself, that letting someone in would only complicate things and hold her back. But Grant hadn't held her back. He'd supported her, challenged her, loved her exactly as she was while encouraging her to grow. Their life together wasn't always easy. They still navigated the complexities of their different backgrounds and his public profile, but it was real and honest and full of love. "Thank you," Emma said suddenly. Grant looked down at her. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when I needed space. For respecting my independence. For loving me through all my fears and doubts. For Zeus," she smiled. "Especially for Zeus." Grant kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for giving me a chance, for seeing past the money and the company to who I really am, for building this life with me. For our family." Charlotte ran over, demanding to be picked up, and Grant lifted her onto his shoulders. James toddled after his sister, and Emma scooped him up, pressing kisses to his chubby cheeks. Zeus circled them all, tail wagging, keeping his pack together. They walked through the park as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Other park visitors smiled at them, seeing a happy family enjoying a beautiful evening. They didn't know the story of how it all started, didn't know about the collision that led to coffee, then dinner, then forever. But Emma knew. She'd remember it for the rest of her life, that moment when Zeus had crashed into her and knocked her off her feet in more ways than one. That moment when a chance encounter with an apologetic stranger had opened up a future she'd never imagined possible. Grant reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently, and Emma squeezed back. Their children laughed and Zeus barked, and the world kept spinning, full of possibility and promise and love. Years later, when people asked Emma and Grant how they met, they'd smile at each other and tell the story of an overly enthusiastic golden retriever, a ruined sketchbook, and a coffee that turned into something so much more. They'd talk about apple orchards and pasta dinners and a proposal in a park. They'd show pictures of their family, their life, everything they'd built together. But what they couldn't quite capture in words was the magic of it all. The way two people from completely different worlds had found each other and decided to merge those worlds into something new. The way love had transformed both of them, making them better, stronger, happier than they'd ever been alone. Emma published a children's book about their story, disguising the details but keeping the heart of it intact. It was about a girl who loved to draw and a boy who had everything except what mattered most, and how a clumsy dog brought them together. The last page showed them years later, happy and surrounded by family, with the dog sleeping peacefully at their feet. It became Emma's best-selling book, touching readers around the world with its message about love, chance encounters, and being open to the unexpected. Grant kept a framed copy of the final illustration in his office, and whenever someone asked about it, he'd tell them it was the story of how he met his wife. Charlotte and James grew up hearing the story, giggling at the part where Daddy's dog knocked Mommy over and begging to hear it again and again. When Charlotte was 7, she announced she wanted a dog just like Zeus, and Grant and Emma surprised her with a golden retriever puppy they named Apollo. Zeus lived to be 13, passing peacefully in his sleep with his family around him. They buried him in the backyard of the brownstone, under a tree, and planted flowers around his grave. Emma created a series of illustrations celebrating Zeus's life, and Grant framed them all. They never forgot that it was Zeus who'd brought them together. Zeus who'd literally run into Emma and set everything in motion. On their 10th anniversary, Grant arranged for them to go back to the orchard, where they'd had their 3rd date. Charlotte and James were old enough to help pick apples now, and they spent the day under the autumn sun, just like Emma and Grant had done years before. They lay in the grass between the trees, the kids running around with Apollo while Emma and Grant held hands and watched their life unfold around them. "You ever wonder what would have happened if Zeus hadn't run into me that day?" Emma asked. Grant considered this. "I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe not in a park, maybe not with a coffee apology, but somehow, some way." "You think we were meant to be?" Emma smiled at the romantic notion. "I think some people are worth crashing into," Grant said. "And I think you and I were always going to be each other's forever, whether we planned it or not." Emma kissed him, tasting apple and cider and the sweetness of 10 years together with so many more ahead. Charlotte made a disgusted sound at her parents kissing, and James laughed, and Apollo barked at something only he could see. They drove home as the sun set, the car full of apples and laughter and love. That night, after the kids were asleep and Apollo was sprawled across the foot of their bed, Emma and Grant sat on their back porch with glasses of wine, looking up at the stars. "I'm happy," Emma said simply. "Right here, right now, with you and our family and this life we've built. I'm so incredibly happy." "Me too," Grant said, pulling her close. "Thank you for saying yes to coffee and dinner, and forever." "Thank you for asking," Emma replied. "Thank you for Zeus and apple picking and never giving up on us." They sat in comfortable silence, wrapped in each other and the life they'd created. From inside the house, Apollo barked once in his sleep, probably dreaming of squirrels or the park or whatever dogs dreamed about. Emma smiled, thinking about another golden retriever in another park 5 years ago, starting a chain of events that led to this perfect moment. She'd come to New York to build a career, to prove herself, to make it on her own. And she'd done all of that. But she'd also found something she hadn't been looking for, something she hadn't even known she needed. She'd found love in its most unexpected form, with a man whose dog had terrible manners and whose heart was big enough to hold all of her dreams along with his own. Grant pressed a kiss to her temple, and Emma closed her eyes, breathing in this moment, this life, this love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and adventures. Charlotte had a school play coming up. James was starting preschool. Emma had a new book series to work on. Grant had business in Singapore next month. But tonight, right now, everything was perfect. They were together, they were happy, and they were home. And it had all started with a dog, a park, a collision, and the kind of magic that happens when you're open to it. When you let yourself fall literally and figuratively, when you say yes to coffee and keep saying yes through dinner and into forever. Emma Dawson had been knocked off her feet in more ways than one that October morning, and she'd never been more grateful for it. Love had found her when she wasn't looking, had transformed her life in ways she never could have imagined, and had given her everything she never knew she wanted. She squeezed Grant's hand, and he squeezed back, and the stars shone above them, and somewhere inside Apollo dreamed his dog dreams, and their children slept peacefully in their beds. And the story that had started with an apology had become a lifetime of love. This was their forever, built on foundation of honesty and respect and partnership. This was their happily ever after, not because it was easy or perfect, but because they chose each other every single day. This was their love story, and Emma wouldn't change a single moment of it, from the collision in the park to this perfect night under the stars. Grant pulled her even closer, and Emma relaxed into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. She thought about all the moments that had led them here, about every choice and chance and coincidence that had woven their lives together. She thought about the future stretching out before them, full of possibility and promise. And she smiled, content and complete, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it together, always together, forever together. Just like Grant had promised that day in the park when he'd apologized with coffee, then dinner, then with his whole heart and his whole life and every tomorrow they'd ever have, forever had started with a collision. And Emma couldn't wait to see where it led them next.